I know you're all very excited for the event we have this evening. So let's get started. I'm Nabil. I'll be your host for the evening. Welcome to a rather special event because normally this is an Essence community, and we talk about topics related to Agile generally, but also Essence. And today we're going to do a bit of that, but we're also going to talk about an exciting new partnership that Essence has with Hexi. And I'm sure some of you are familiar with that, and indeed the creator behind it. So I won't give my normal quick spiel about what the Essence for Agility Meetup Group is about, because some of it will be covered in a little intro that Ivar will have for us. But essentially, we have two phenomenal contributors to our industry present to talk us through the new partnership. We have Dave Snowden and Ivar Jacobson from Hexi and Essence, respectively. So today we're going to explore the partnership about that, what benefits that brings to us, and how it could be a very exciting thing for our industry. So we're going to have an overview from Hexi and Essence, and then we'll have some discussions about some of the differences, the similarities, and what it means for us and how we can benefit from it. So to kick us off, I am going to hand over to Dave Snowden himself to give us a little intro. So Dave, over to you.
Okay. First of all, it's good to see a lot of our community here. So there's a lot of familiar faces. So I think we've got a good balance here. Just to give the context on this, we've been working for some time on the Hexi concept. And the principle is to try and get into a multi-vendor, multi-tool approach, not just in Agile, but in all spaces. It's sort of an argument against big consultancy frameworks, which seek to say this is the way with a linear approach. Yeah. So as far as we're concerned, Hexi, the initial launch was around the EU field guide on how do you manage in complexity. That links into things like STRO mapping. We're looking at Hexi kits around foresight, around strategy, around teams, around leadership. So there's a whole body of material here. But Agile, we wanted to treat slightly differently on the basis that has one of the highest scopes, in effect, for something which is more multi-vendor, multi-tool. So we started to talk about that with people. We started to develop the idea. And it's based on a key principle here, which is how you scale a complex adaptive system. And I'm going to introduce some key language here, which is important. Our own community will be familiar, but I'll try and explain it for everybody. Complex systems scale not by aggregation or repetition, but they scale by decomposition to what's called the lowest level of coherent granularity. And I'll come back and define that in a minute. And then recombination. So it's rather like DNA. DNA is 4 basic chemical compounds produce the huge variety of organic life. So it's that sort of principle. Yeah. So if you look at some in Agile, something like SAFe is, as far as we're concerned, it doesn't decompose the methods. It just slams together anything which somebody wants a certificate in and defines them in some sort of stovepipe type way, right? So that's not what we mean. We need to drop a level down from that so we can allow recombination. The way I've normally explained it is if you take Scrum, for example, as an assembly of either methods, practices, or something else, which we're talking about, we're still working out the language here, then there's no reason why I shouldn't take a sprint and replace it with a 3-month time box from DSDM methodology. Now, if you're religious about Scrum, you would say, but that's not what it's about. If you're not religious about Scrum in that sense, you'd say, well, you've got a development period with an input-output. That development period could be 3 months with a maximum deliverable product, a minimum deliverable product, a maximum resource, a minimum resource, and we can still have the Scrum process either side of it. So that's kind of like the level of granularity we're looking at, and we're doing that in a whole body of methods and tools. So that's one core principle. Our own general approach to this is not to take a case-based approach. So our approach to methods, any of the methods you see in our open source wiki or we talk about, have generally come out a 3 to 5 year gestation period. What we actually do is we take theory from natural sciences about the nature of systems, the nature of human cognition. We then develop methods or tools which are coherent to that science, and then we experiment with them and go through a period of modification and change until we're comfortable. Now, that is very different from what you normally see, which is find a few cases, generalize the cases, and then create a method from that. We're deliberately not taking that approach. Yeah? So, for example, within the Agile community, we've developed methods which are pre-Scrum techniques. We see Scrum as a technique for moving things from complex to complicated. In Cynefin terms, it's a liminal technique. It's not a complex systems technique. But we develop methods like entangled trios, like 888, like unarticulated need mapping, which are designed to change the way we interact with users to better then feed a process like Scrum. So we have methods designed to change the way you create the backlog, which are based on complexity principles. And again, taking that multi-method, multi-vendor, not trying to develop things in combination, but to recombine them. So the whole principle of Hexi is to take any body of methods, break it down into this lowest coherent unit, and then allowing almost like a play environment, the things to overlap and recombine in different ways. And there's other concepts on Hexi as well, like transparency overlays. Is this method being used for discovery? Is it being used for action? Is it being used for analysis and so on? So we've got a range of things within the kit. Yeah? The other thing to say very clearly is that, and Nina's, thanks Nina's put up actually a link on that so you can have a look at them. The other thing to say is what we are doing within the Agile community is to say that this will be an open source approach. In fact, generally that's true for Hexi. So we've already published the standards for Hexi production so that anybody can produce to those standards. And we're setting up a facility by which anybody can give us artwork and links, and we can produce their own Hexis for them. And there is going to be no curation or no censorship of that beyond minimal standards in terms of formatting. Yeah, so nobody is going to adjudicate content. To give an illustration, those of you who know me know that I think Myers-Briggs is a pseudoscience, but I don't think it is a pseudoscience. That's what it says. But companies use it, so there will be a Myers-Briggs Hexi in the OD kit. Yeah, because that's what companies do, and therefore it has to be in the system because it's something they may modify or change as they move forward. So we're taking an open source approach on this, and once we've done the drive to get it up and running, yeah, then we'll move it into some type of collective ownership, and that's under active discussion at the moment. So that's kind of like the broader plan. Now, as we were doing this, several people said, what do you think of Ivar Jacobson's Essence? So I went and read the papers and said, I've never liked Neoplatonism. I think he's doing something different. And we went through several iterations on that. And then several people got us to get together, and we realized there was an interface point. Yeah, whether that's practices or applications, we're not quite sure. But what it allows us to do is anything which has been through the Essence process can be brought across into Hexis intact. And we're already looking at that in terms of, you know, Ivar's worked with one of the versions of Scrum, yeah? So that we can bring across the TAC. He's working with David on Kanban and so on. But from our point of view, we'll have several versions of Scrum with different sources for it. We won't just have one version. We're not going to make a decision about who's right between the different Scrum providers. Yeah, any one of them can have a kit within the system. So what we're able to do at sort of level one, and this is already agreed, is take across everything which Ivar is currently working with and move it into Hexi at one level, with the opportunity to people to go back onto the Essence stuff and come backwards and forwards between it. Yeah. It's also then possible for other people coming into the Hexi framework to see value in Essence, and they may do so. Now, the purpose of this discussion is A, make people aware of that, and we've already announced that at a couple of conferences, but it's also to open up the possibility of a wider collaboration. So this is something we're opening up in the community. We know we can interface at practice level, but it may be there's more we can do together. And this is the first part of that discussion. So that's genuinely open. What we've definitely agreed to do is to remove the competitive element, i.e. Essence is not competing with Hexi and vice versa. That's the last thing the Agile community needs at the moment. So we've found a way in which they can work together. and work together in a way which progresses both faster. So as a broad principle. So that's a sort of summary, yeah, from a hotel room near Covent Garden. And now I'll hand over to Ivar.
Okay. So I'm trying to get my slides up and running. Can you see them?
Not yet, no.
Oh, so then it's a problem here. So I tried to. Okay, now it should be better.
Yes, that's good.
All right, so I prepared some slides so I can remember what I want to say. And it's about essence and its use cases. Are we driven by fashion? If we look on what has happened in the methodology space or method space over the years, we have been going from one paradigm to the other. And we have had methods since 50, 60 years, and they have changed the direction. Object orientation was very popular 25 or whatever it was years ago. Then UML, unified process, we got Agile, now it's scaling Agile, and tomorrow we will have something else. All of these have good things, but so that's not the problem. We have had lots of methods, see here, they all like isolated islands. There is very little visible in common, and still there is a lot that is in common, but hidden. That makes it very difficult to compare, to move people from one team to another in organization, and many things. So what are the problems? Well, we have identified there are many problems. One is we have methods war since 50 years. This is represented by the comic Agile. Picture here, you see the different methodologies. They have fences, they have their own little fort, and they have their own names for things and so on. It's crazy. Practice are locked into method prisons. It means that there are practices in each of one of these methods, but they are not reusable by others easily. You have to rewrite them or borrow them and not really necessarily understand what the original author wanted. But they are in their prisons. We have gurus, a world of gurus, and in the industry that is so huge as the software industry, are we dependent on gurus? I was once upon a time a guru when it comes to rational unified process, and I felt the whole thing was just so immature, and we want to change that. They have no common ground, these methods. They have basically only the alphabet that they share, a little exaggerated, but not too much. And methods are only descriptions. They are not active. You don't get the help in actually executing or implementing the methods. I've never used the word crazy in these kind of contexts before, but I can't find a better label for it. This is crazy. And there is a paper I've written on this, the craziest thing working the methods, that you can read. So is essence the answer? Well, if we go and ask people, Scott Ambler, who is the founder of Disciplined Agile, says essence is one of the most important things happening in the software engineering space. Joseph Pellerin, who once was CTO of eBay and is agile psychologist, I now consider Essence to potentially be the biggest step forward in the method space since the Agile manifesto. Jeff Sutherland, Essence is the key to success. And Jacobson from the Spotify model camp, he's the founder of a Spotify model, has also positive things to say. There are many other similar answers. But Essence, what is Essence? It's a smart common ground for all methods. That is, of course, the word smart means something. It's not just the common ground like a vocabulary or something like that. It's much more. But it's not another method. It makes any method better, and I will try to show that. Concretely, it is like a specification to reuse when you describe a method. So before I go a little bit more into the Essence itself, I'll tell you a little about the killer use cases, because there must be something new that comes with using Essence. And one of them, if we talk about for the team only, you get a common ground so you can compare practices, compare methods in a way we've not been able to do in the past. And you have an ecosystem of practice, meaning you can, from all the different methods that you find interesting, you can create an ecosystem. And in that ecosystem, you have practices from different camps. We have, you can select, the team can select their own way of working, and by picking practices from the ecosystem. And these practices that the team select can be different because of a problem the team is solving, a competence of a team, and many other factors. For the first time, as we know, Essence bridged the gap between learning and doing. Basically, all methods or methodologies, they focus on the learning cycle and do certification for what people have learned. That is done through websites, slideware, videos, and similar things. But when it comes to doing, there is very little support more than consultants. You can recruit consultants that have gone through a 2-day course or a 4-day course and then been certified. This is not enough. There are not many consultants that are really good, and we need much more support when people start working. And maybe one of the most important things is that the user experience of a method is active, not passive. Passive like books and websites and so on. So people learn not only from reading, but also through games and state changes and things that activate the method. There are other users. This is team is a key user, but we have team of teams, we have organization. Teacher get a very different way of teaching compared to in the past. They teach something that is relevant not only for one method, but for all methods. Researchers, methodologists, auditors, there are so many, and all of them get use cases. There are hundreds of use cases we can foresee. Best of all, Essence doesn't attempt to be an alternative to any method. Instead, it's designed to just make them better. And there are other things it's designed for, not only to make it better. So a few words now about Essence itself. It has two components. It has a language which is visual, simple, intuitive, very easy to learn and read. Now the language has a deep semantics, so it's not trivial, but no one really needs to care about that unless they are interested in the details. The kernel has identified elements that are the essential things to work with, the essential things to do, the essential competence you need. And it's an international standard. It took a very long time to develop it because so many people have improvements to do. So, but it is very stable since it was taken in 2014. There has been almost no changes to talk about. Just now, very quickly, so give you a view of the kernel itself. And I'm not able to describe it in this short introduction, but there are, it's basically a kind of model, a domain model to some extent of what software development really is all about. And so we had, to the top, we have elements that we call alphas, because we have key elements that you want to measure progress of. So we have most important elements in the method. And then we have activity spaces and we have competences, different kinds of competences. But as I said, to go through this requires a little bit more time than I have now. The language is also quite simple. Practice is described by using alphas, activities, competencies, work products, and we have the alpha has states, which is very important. The characteristics of alphas, alphas progress through states. Practices are there to create this ecosystem. The architecture of an ecosystem starts from the bottom of the language and the kernel. The kernel and the language is a common ground. It's agnostic for any specific practice, method, and framework. Practices are built on top of this essence, and they use it to describe what the practices. And there are different kinds of practices. There are very basic, generic practices like Scrum, user stories, Kanban. And then there are more specific practices. And a method is a composition of these practices. So there may be many different methods in a company, and of course in the world there will be even more. So here we have some existing essentialized practices. We have, of course, the most famous ones, but there are hundreds of them. We have not published all of them because we have not gone through the process that is needed. We want the original author of a practice, or at least an original author of a practice to approve it and say it's mine. So we don't borrow practices and just design them ourselves. That is not the preferred way of working. So, as I said, most important, we essentially will create those and have them approve a result. So to finish, I want to just go back to the quote of Joseph that I now consider Essence to potentially be the biggest step forward in method space since the Agile manifesto. These are very strong words, and we still need to see how close we get to that. But we are happy to work with you and see what we can, and particularly today, it's very interesting to discuss it. And of course, I'm very excited about this opportunity to work with Snowden and the Hexis and Cynefin. And I think we have a very exciting future together. I think it's fundamentally important to the world that important steps forward like this in the industry, we partner about them and don't sit down and work in our isolation. So now over to, is it Simon?
Yes, thank you, Ivar. So what I wanted to try to do, so I work with Ivar and know quite a lot about Essence. I've had a history of working a little bit with Cynefin, so I know a reasonable amount about that, although not nearly as much as many here today. But what I wanted to try to do was to pick up on some of the stuff that Ivar and Dave had said and try to draw out some of the similarities between the two approaches and some of the differences perhaps, and then also stimulate some of the conversation, some of the discussion with you, because the big part of today is to try to get your interest in this, potentially get some people together to start looking into it in more depth and to start really exploring the intersection of these two approaches and working out how they can best support each other. So I'm a bit interested in people's kind of experience of both the two approaches. So I was thinking about how to do this, and at the risk of having the current chat disappear off into the top of the window, I thought I'd ask a quick 1 to 5 question, or 0. So 0 if you don't really have any prior knowledge of either of them, and 1 if you've got experience and knowledge of, let's say, Essence on the one side, because it starts at the E, Essence but no Hexi as a 1, Hexi but no Essence as a 5, and then 3 and 4 and 2 in between. So if you know equal about both of them, it's a 3, all about Hexi, it's a 5, all about Essence, it's a 1, and then 0 if you don't really know much about either of them. So I'll let you respond, and I'll keep an eye on the chat. So that's interesting. It's good. Okay, so that's a good mix. So as we'd hoped, actually, we've got a nice balanced community, as Dave spotted at the beginning. I've spotted some people I've seen from these meetups before, and I'm going to take a wild guess that for each of those of you on the kind of the 1 and the 5 and the 0 ends of things, you know, there's a lot of stuff that you can see will be similar between the two approaches, but there are also going to be some confusion. So one thing we would like to do is to try and get some questions about things where people have got questions. But I also wanted to draw out, just while you're thinking, some of the differences, but mostly some of the similarities. And actually, one of the main differences actually is the language. So, you know, historically, the two approaches have come from different places and they've picked some of the same language. So Ivar talked about the practice as being the kind of the thing that's set up to perform a coherent task in Essence, and a method is a collection of practices. In Hexi, method is something a bit lower, a bit closer towards that lowest coherent unit. So one thing we do need to do is make sure we get the language consistent so we know what we're talking about. But today we can probably forgive each other for using language that we're familiar with, not necessarily to agree with each other. The other big difference really is where the natural home of each approach is within the Cynefin framework, where Hexi sits on the left-hand complex and chaotic sides, and Essence more where you've got defined process and the complicated and the clear side. But actually, that's not a bad thing, because that interface between the two is actually where we can get quite a lot of value and quite a lot of intersection, especially where Essence has defined those elements of practice with the language Ivar talked about. Well, in some cases, they can be, the whole practice can be that lowest coherent unit, and in other cases, it might be a bit of the practice. So say, for example, with Scrum as a whole might be a good coherent unit, but equally, maybe the retrospective inside Scrum is something that's worth decomposing down to. So there's bits like that we're really trying to understand how they work. So getting some of your help in that would be really good. But the main thing I noticed when looking at the two is actually that there's so much in common. And there's so much in common at their approach. So they're both not a framework. They're both focused on practices, not on big assemblies or methods of practices. They're both agnostic. So neither of them has an opinion particularly on exactly what to do. They don't have a view that this version of Scrum is right or that version of Kanban is right. And they're about supporting multiple implementations and allowing the users to make the choices themselves. They both set out to be easy to learn to use from scratch. So they both even though there's a lot of complexity, both in the language, in the actual language, and then the kind of descriptive language, they're intended to be built such that you could turn up at a workshop with not a lot of experience and get some value from each practice. And then if you want to go into more depth, you can go into a lot more depth. And they're both, as Dave said, about democratizing the practices, about really freeing them and exposing them to be as valuable as they can without wrapping them up in methods or in assemblies. But I think the most important thing that I want to try and leave you on before we open the discussion is that they're really both about thinking frameworks. They're about getting better ideas from people. Dave talks about Cynefin being a sense-making framework. Ivar talks about Essence as being a thinking framework. They're not about the answers. They're both about the questions. And I think that's what makes it so interesting as a topic to talk about this evening. Interestingly, the other big thing they have in common almost independently is that they both play to the physical use of cards in a lot of the practices. So physical cards, playing games, running workshops, using the tactile nature of cards to generate better discussions amongst people is another kind of similarity. And actually, that's something that I think we're both trying to evolve, both with the Hexi packs and with the increased use of Essence cards. So hopefully that's helped a little bit the two communities understand a little bit about why we think this is such a good collaboration, a good partnership between the two. I'd like to open it up more to the community here, though. So I'm interested in what you think, whether you think there are opportunities for you to get involved, but also what do you think of the similarities? What do you think are the kinds of problems that we'll be able to solve better together than separately? So while you're thinking, we can use the chat or the hands. Dave, anything you want? Have I misrepresented anything?
No, I don't think so. I think the key thing to understand is at the moment we've agreed a point at which Hexi and Essence can avoid competition, and that's good news. That doesn't mean that we've accepted the Essence process for all Hexi work or vice versa. So they're distinct. They found a point of interface. Part of the function here is to explore other opportunities. So when you and I talked this morning, Simon, with Ivar, the idea of using an Essence process to validate an assembly, there may be things we haven't thought of yet, right? So at the moment, this isn't us both coming together and launching a new approach to Agile. We're both working in different ways. We found a point of interface. We're now exploring with our communities, can we do more? Yeah.
Yeah, and actually you talked this morning about developing a language around Hexi as well. It could be that Essence as a language and at the first level, it's actually quite a simple language, as you showed in the slide. That might be something that could be a good start point. Maybe not, but maybe. Ivar, anything you wanted to add? Or have I misrepresented your views in any way?
Marginally, so it couldn't be better. Thank you.
So what about everybody else? What are your thoughts? Anybody got anything they want to contribute, either as a chat? Do you want to unmute, Mike, or would you rather I read?
Hi there. Yeah, thank you for both contributors, in fact, all three. I just basically said I'm still a little confused. I've not used Hexis, and I certainly have no experience with Essence. So for me, I'm starting off as a beginner, which is fantastic. And I guess the way that I learn is usually through some type of practical interaction. And so my suggestion would be to have either an interactive session or a video that kind of starts off with a problem statement. This is what we're trying to solve, and then runs through using a combination of these to try and get to a solution. I think that way you both explain what they are, how they're used, the value that you're going to get out of it, etc., etc. So that's where my thinking was.
I think, Mike, just to say, we've actually been running Hexi programs in order to get that experience, yeah? We wouldn't be combining Essence into those programs, but Essence generates cards into the Hexi process. That's what we currently are, yeah? And that's where we're going. So over the next 3 months, we'll run those courses in Madrid, in the UK, and Germany, and Denmark, again in the States probably. And that's part of the development of the generic method. So this is, consider this more a sort of seminar discussion than a chance to educate you in the process, because that needs a physical aspect.
No, I absolutely agree. I think the problem for me, and I certainly have seen some stuff on Hexi, but the problem for me is understanding the overlap and where you would use one as opposed to the other. So if we could get experts like yourself.
So let me respond to that, all right? You wouldn't use one or the other, all right? If you want to take a method and essentialize it, there's a point in the essentialization process where you would take a practice across into Hexi, and therefore Hexi could use that, yeah? So it's not an either or, it's a both and. But a lot of people will generate Hexis, but will not want to essentialize their methods. They won't want to go that extra level, if that makes sense.
It does on a conceptual sort of level, though practically trying to see that happen, I think would be where I would gain some value, which is why I sort of suggested something interactive or a video of a session being held. Anyway, that's just my thought.
I think it's a nice idea. We should definitely take away. I mean, what one bit where they can work together is as Dave was saying about some of the Hexi approaches being your pre-scrum. So typically the essence practices begin when you have some opportunity that you want to pursue, and then you can select the right practices to fit your problem, to fit your team, and give yourself the best success of delivering some value for your stakeholders. If you don't know what your opportunity is, or don't know what the right opportunity is, or don't understand the state of the situation that you're in, or you want to get going and get to a position where you can start selecting practices, then many of the Cynefin and Hexi approaches are probably a better fit. So in essence terms, the first part of the activities that you do are about identifying opportunities, but there might be some work to be done before you even know if an opportunity is present or if it's not. So even with a kind of pre-scrum example, that's probably not a bad thing that we could model through and show some practical things.
Great, thank you.
So Craig Coburn, is there any interface to the Wardley doctrine?
Okay, so I mean, I can answer that. We are actually planning to produce a Hexi kit for Wardley for the different methods. So Peter and others are working on that. Yeah. So Wardley is another body of methods, tools, and representations that can fit in. Now, it may be that essentializing that is something Simon would be interested in.
Yeah, and I think that's one area where Essence can help. If you've got lots of different ways of doing things, methods in Cynefin language, then having some consistent way to describe them can be useful. And what we found a lot is, especially when you've got in-house practices, starting to try to describe them in the Essence language, even if it's just a very rudimentary way, very often shows up inconsistencies, overlaps, gaps, and things like that. So if you're going to write down a practice, then it's not a bad way to make sure that what you're writing down is going to be probably a bit more coherent. Okay, so we've got some more questions. Peter, do you want to ask your question or do you want to be read?
Hi guys, yeah, just hopefully you can hear me. I just have this connotation when I saw the Essence. It's like the way you present it, it's like the IT system design. So I don't know whether it's intentional or not, but so I will comment you on this. But the second question is like, this is my probably first call on the Essence, and my initial, expectation was that we will be helping develop quality software, right? So my question is, how does it help all the work that you're doing and merging together now? How does it actually help building quality software? Thank you.
I mean, to the first question, it's not designed to look like an IT system. It's a model of software engineering, and to be able to use to describe any particular method. That was the original thought when we started the Essence design. Now, once we introduced Essence and we gave a state-based approach where we can measure progress, we found many new uses that we didn't expect from the beginning. And that is coming basically every year, something new, fundamental come up, because we have found some foundation for software engineering, something that is true for any endeavor that we describe with the methods, existing methods. And how we get this quality software? Well, we use Essence to describe practices that then are composed into methods. Big methods like, for instance, SAFE could be described using Essence as a platform, and then you have all the practices that are in SAFE composed on top of a platform. So you create the methods this way, or frameworks, or whatever you want to call it.
And to answer from a Hexi perspective, what we're basically saying is, we want to get all of the various methods and tool sets which are available for software developers, and allow you to do a best of breed approach rather than have to adopt a single framework. And that was my point. So, for example, if I'll take two examples on Scrum. I gave one earlier. You could replace a 2-week sprint with a time box from DSDM, which was one of the inputs into the Agile manifesto. We've done work in Romania to replace retrospectives with continuous Gamba-based software capture. So that, again, you could peel that out and replace it with that element. So the principle is combine and recombine different elements of Denny methods and tools, and a facilitation kit which allows you to say, okay, we're going to do this, or we've done this, we're going to do this differently. So it's about tool and method selection, in order to optimize the way those methods are then used to develop better software. So we're not creating a new method. So, for example, our methods will be branded Cynefin Company, but Hexi is an independent brand which will contain our and other people's methods.
Yeah. Bruno asked, can Essence be used as pre-Scrum as well? So I'll answer that quite quickly, if I may. And the answer is yes, but actually that's where the connection with Cynefin might be really useful. So when Ivar showed the kernel earlier, there was the top part, if you remember, there was three sections. There was a green section, a yellow section, and the blue section. And the green is all about the customers, the yellow is all about the solution, and the blue is all about the endeavor, the way you work. Now, Scrum, as a practice, almost exclusively focuses on how you work. It doesn't help you with your requirements or how you create your solution, and it doesn't help you manage your stakeholders or identify your opportunity. Now, other practices inside the Essence ecosystem might well be directed at helping you in those other two areas. Now, some of those practices might come from Hexis, and actually I'm quite interested in looking at some of the Hexi approaches and saying, well, are they good practices to help people understand the opportunity, manage their stakeholders better, understand the challenges they're facing, because there's there's not as many essentialized practices in that space as there are in the implementation and the way of working spaces. So the short answer is yes, but the way that it's a yes most strongly might be by collaborating and taking on board some of the Hexis things, and maybe even delegating to a Hexi workshop to generate some of those ideas rather than necessarily run it with Essence cards. I did pick up one comment that I wanted to throw back, if I may, to Mick. So Mick, you've said that you've spent some time both with Essence and with Hexis, and we're at the Hexi workshop last week. So I'm really interested in your view on the differences between the two approaches and what your experiences of them both have been. that okay? Sorry to put you on the spot.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Yeah, so yeah, I sort of, when Dave first brought the Hexi kit, so I got on board with them, and I, you know, been a fan of Cynefin before that, and then obviously I've done the Essence training with yourself, and, you know, had further conversations, so I can see where these things, you know, the overlap is. Especially last week when I was with Dave in physically in the workshop with the Hexi kits, and actually using them, and I think it's like Dave said, you know, there's you know, you've got all the Hexi cards, but that's not a constraint, because you, as you're going, you can add your own stuff into the Hexi kits that someone may bring up and say, oh, I think this is a good way of actually bringing something in that maybe not in the Hexi kit. So I can see how that works. And most of my time with Essence has actually been spent virtually. So there's the difference between the physical cards with the Hexi kits based, and then the difference between most of the stuff I've done with Essence has been in a virtual environment, and actually, you know, having that, it's a different thing. I mean, when Dave, this has got to be going back almost a year, I suppose. We did some virtual stuff, Dave. Do you remember?
Yeah.
So I can see where the overlap is there as well, and I don't know if there's possibility to do any work across that, but yeah, I think it's one of those things you know, you're never going to get to the bottom of both these things on a 90-minute webinar. You've actually got to, you know, get into them, play with them, and you almost find out where the interaction comes up with a lot of this stuff, I think. But I can definitely see where they would, like Dave said, sort of interact.
And I think with Essence, you know, when you're using cards, in person is always going to be better. I did a workshop the other week, and you know, the difference in seeing how people interact with physical elements rather than virtual is you know, it's completely different. It's much harder to get the right engagement.
I've just added a screenshot in of one slide, right? That actually shows on the left-hand side existing hexes within the EU field guide. And you can see the format, you know, brief description. The back of them has got a QR code, so you can go to the method wiki. So there's a standard form for a hexi, which is description, symbol, turn it over, longer description, QR code, scan the QR code. You can go to a detailed description of the method. Right? That acts as a cognitive device. On the right-hand side, you see the initial draft hexes we're producing for the essentialized Scrum. So you can see the level of granularity. And in the middle, we're giving you the sort of standard. So that will give you a sort of sense, yeah, of how it works, right? That's a visual.
Can everybody see that? I think I've shared it.
Yep.
So that's the left-hand side with that sort of examples, the middle, and then.
Yeah, so what we showed there is effectively two Cynefin methods interfacing with aspects of the Scrum method post-essentialization. Yeah, so that shows things coming together in different combinations. So hopefully that helps people see where we are on this. Yeah. As I say, I think, you know, from our point of view, this is going to be vendor neutral. So any vendor can put together a Hexi kit and put it into the system. Yeah, and we're not going to curate content in any way whatsoever, just standards.
And that's similar for Essence. In fact, we're both keen on having community-based ecosystems where anybody is able to come and create practices, contribute to them, extend things, and there's no judgment. You know, if you prefer that version of Scrum or Kanban, great, use it. If you prefer a different one, that's great too. We should be able to help you in either of them. And that's one of the big differences from the big frameworks, in that there's always been a temptation in the past to pick best practice when that might not be best practice for everybody. So we've got a couple more questions, I think. Did I miss any further up? So let's see. could there be confusion if you, I think that was the answer of Jason, confusion if you use Hexi and Essence? It shouldn't be, because the in Dave's language, the kind of lowest coherent unit ought to be the same thing. And whether you've described it in a hexagonal card or a rectangular card, it shouldn't change how you use it. Nigel, could we see Essence as a method collection stroke library and Hexi as an exploratory capability using methods? Hexi is also a collection of methods too. The hexagon shapes give you limitless exploration in different and evolving contexts. Any thoughts on that, Dave or Ivar?
Well, first thought is, I mean, we use hexagons too. Have used it. It's part of a standard. So the hexagon is a very good symbol for what we are talking about. It's interesting we came up with it independently. Another example of that, we have good reasons to collaborate. And when it comes to the first, could we see Essence method collection library and Hexi as an exploratory capability using methods? In a way, both are exploratory. As I see it, is in different space. So in essence, it's more on a lower level, on a practice level, and well, a composition of practices. Whereas Hexi is in the exploratory space.
Yeah, and I think there's two comments. I mean, Bonnie's right. We're starting to think activities is the better interface than practices, right? And I think Jeff's got it right. So if you adopt the Essence philosophy, and we're not saying we do yet, we're exploring it like everybody else, then you can also use the Hexi approach, because there's this interface point between Essence and Hexi. If you don't adopt the Essence approach, you can still generate Hexis. You don't have to take that approach. You can still generate Hexis, right? And we think that's what some other method vendors will do. They won't want to get into essentialization because they don't agree with it, but they'll be happy to have their methods represented at that stage. I would also contradict Simon a little bit. There is actually quite a big difference between using hexagon shapes and squares, in that people tend to combine them and recombine them in novel ways, whereas they tend less to categorize them, which is what you see with playing cards. Playing cards nearly always end up like a Kanban board rather than a honeycomb. And what we're trying for is the honeycombs, which links in with the question about patterns. There is a link with pattern language, and the hexes define patterns. So you could say that that's the equivalent of Alexander's list of types. Yeah. The complexity element which adds on to that, which is different from pattern languages and from the use of them in cybernetics, is we're also using overlays to define different types of interaction. And as you change the interactions, you move way beyond pattern language.
State complicando tutto.
Into complexity, yeah.
And the word pattern is also used in Essence. It's one of the language types where it's a thing that you apply to a practice, or you turn on or off. So it might be options, different ways of doing things, or it could be to describe, for example, in Scrum, the pattern construct is used to describe the accountabilities. So it's probably another area where getting clarity on what the words mean, and they're probably different from design patterns as well.
I think that there's another thing which is worth pointing out. From our point of view, Agile is one set of the things we're doing with the Hexi concept. But what the Hexi concept will allow is people in the Agile community to grab methods and tools from strategic foresight, from team construction, from OD, and integrate them into Agile practices. So we allow effectively a much faster assimilation of novel ideas. And one of the things we're thinking about in Hexi is if anybody's got a method or a tool or a concept they want to throw in, they can just put them in, and we'll put them together in packs. Once we've got critical mass, we'll publish them. And Hexi also contains disruptive quotes, disruptive cartoons. Yeah, there's a whole body of stuff around it as it sort of develops.
So we're drawing towards 7. I said I'd hand over to Nabil more for the proper Q&A. I've been dominating a little bit, sorry. So I was looking at the kind of the discussion of commonalities and differences, which a lot of the conversation has been about. But we probably want to move on to more wider Q&A, especially around what next and how we can get involved, how we can do more things. There's still a few more questions as well. So it might be best if I hand back to Nabil to continue the last little section.
Well, I mean, you are doing a great job, Simon, so I'm happy for also you to just continue.
I don't mind, I'm happy to. Shall I continue then? So we've got a few more. Dave's picked up quite a few of the questions that came through. Let's see. So we've got, so Julian, you're talking about, again, I guess it's back to this, would something like a video or some more concrete examples help you? You're saying without demonstrable use cases where solutions were reached, value preserved, clear advantage of competing method, etc., these may remain inconceivable concepts for you. It's what would help you get past that? Is it concrete case studies? Is it experiencing it yourself? What would help you, Julian?
Thank you, Simon. For me, the essence of all of this is about resolving issues, solving problems, and taking advantage of opportunities. Now, whatever does not solve a problem does not matter to me, is extraneous. So I want to see why sell it to me. Why should I bother about X's? Why should I bother about safe? Why should I bother? Why should I take Essence over Hexi, or why should I merge them? I'm only here to resolve a problem. I want to solve a problem and get value to my organization and to the customer, period. Anything outside that is a no-no for me.
Yeah, and I think in that position, which is perfectly reasonable, you're probably going to be interested in about 6 months to a year's time as the thing develops and it starts to roll out, right? And that's fair. Yes, that's more than fair enough, right? One of the things we're looking for in this session is people in both communities, or in one community or they're interested in the other, who are interested in working on those next steps.
I think as Greg points out in the chat as well, some facilitation can help as well. So not different situations require different solutions, and there are some where either could probably work with, like the pre-Scrum example, but largely understanding the context of where you are will probably lead you to one path or another. So actually, that's one way they're quite complementary. They help you at different points in your life cycle of your problem to solution. Jeff, do you want to unmute and ask your question? Or one of you've been having a few questions, but what one do you want us to focus on next?
I can if you like. I think, and again, I've been trying to explore Hexi a little bit offline by reading the website and so off in preparation for the meetup. And from listening to the conversation, what I've seen, I'm still not getting my head wrapped around how Hexi helps me understand exactly how two practices would interact when I put the tiles together. It shows me that I can have an interaction, but I don't understand how I express how that interaction happens or the intent behind it. And it seems Essence has an opportunity to fill that gap, that by modeling the practices at kind of a more detailed level, I can actually show how alphas and other things potentially connect across the tile boundaries. So I'm wondering, Dave, can you help us understand how Hexi helps do that, helps show that interaction?
Part of the thinking behind Hexi is good old-fashioned object orientation with inheritance polymorphism, input-output.
Okay.
And basically, if you go to the QR code on a Hexi, it should define the output, and therefore you can check the input. Now, we're also building in the transparency overlays to that. And again, this key element which is coming out is certain types of method are likely to generate completely novel interactions, which you can't control, at which point we move from assembly to assemblage. Yeah, to take an example. So I think a lot of that is in the background material, the sort of things in the QR code, the linkages. And we want to build increasingly reliable of acrylics. These are the overlays We've already got ones which have arrows and point and say stop and think again. We're going to expand those considerably. Yeah.
Okay, so exploring maybe the synergy of the two approaches a little more, it's conceivable a QR code on a practice could contain an embedded essence model.
Yeah, it could. And
practice.
I think that's where it got interesting in discussion we had this morning.
Oh, okay.
It's using an essence approach on an assembly to see if there were things missing. All right. So that's completely different from anything we thought about, but that was reasonably interesting.
Thank you. So there's a question from Jason about the risk of especially where you're opening out to having lots of different variants of things and lots of different people's interpretations of different practices. Does it get overwhelming? Does it become difficult for users to see the wood from the trees? From Jason, is that fair summary of your question, Jason? What do you think about that, Dave and Ivar?
Let me give you an illustration. One of the things we were talking about this week, all right, was actually going to a company or organization and agreeing which methods and tools they want to legitimize and which they don't, and creating unique packs for that company, which could be distributed very quickly. All right. So, or you just have a coach chooses the pack they want. So if they don't like Jeff Sutherland's approach to Scrum, they won't pick the current Essence version. They'll pick the Scrum Inc. one, and that's okay. So people can choose their own combinations that are used for facilitation. So I think we see that as emergent as it builds up, all right? And that's why we're deliberately not curating or closing things down. Yeah, and there will be catalogs, and people can choose the ones they want to play with. They can play with it. They can create their own. They can build, and that's the essence in inverted commas of the overall approach.
Well, we expect, of course, that we are in the early days now, and we still expect the Scum.org's version of Scum to be be essentialized, as well as many others. So then it will be, you can easily compare them and easily select which one you want to have. But that is not enough. We will still see people who today put together complete methods like SAFE. They will be there with a method, call it SAFE, and it will have practices from the ecosystem. It will be, they will provide a certification maybe, and consultants that are expert on this particular configuration of practices. And then there will be a subset of that. So even if there are lots of practices in the ecosystem, some of them will be selected by people who are, or at least feel competent in doing that. So, and then of course, we can foresee that there will be so many, so you need to have some kind of expert system, AI support, machine learning to help you put together practices that work well in a particular situation.
Yeah, and I think I think Simon's got a good summary there. And I think where we are at the moment is, Ivar wants everybody to essentialize their methods. We're quite neutral about that. If everybody wants to essentialize their methods, fine. It makes the interface easy, but that's Ivar's business. That's not ours. Ours is to create this one level, right? But then there is this wider exploration. I could see us being, we're open to learning on this. That's the essence for partnership, right?
Mick, you've got your hand up.
Oh yeah, well, it's not a question, more of a. I'll put something in the chat about. Maybe an unintended positive outcome to some of this is the fact that people can see Dave and Ivar collaborating together. Because I just put, if you spend 10 minutes on LinkedIn, I don't think you can come across a more, a community trying to eat itself than the Agile community sometimes. So I think Dave and Ivar showing that there's some collaboration be done around this sort of thing is is a positive thing for a wider group of people.
I'd agree, Mick, and we're also pleased. We've had really positive feedback from other groups, like some of the Kanban groups, like Business Agility and so on. I think the time is right for something which allows this combination and recombination. Right, and that's the way of breaking the framework is not to create another framework, which is what some people are doing, like Agile 2 and so on, but to say, let's find out what we've already got and find ways to use it better. And I think that's a philosophy here. And also where I'm trying to stop is what you, people know I'm talking about probably, people are taking methods or tools and throwing them together in new combinations. But the only thing they're then selling is certification to run training and certification. Okay? And that seems to be the model at the moment, rather than saying, how do we improve software delivery? How do we improve culture in companies? That's not there, because the business models are all training and certification in that sense.
I think that's part of the similarity is it's about creating an open environment, not a closed environment.
Yeah.
And whilst, in fact, we've got similar revenue models in terms of, tooling and consultancy and training and things like that, but mostly it's about getting people using them. And that's why having open source models gets people interested, rather than trying to wrap it all behind, annual fees and certifications and so on. We've got Dave for another 6 minutes before you head around the corner to the opera. So if there's any particular Cynefin and Hexi questions, we'll try to take them first. But I'm just trying to look back. Dove talks about curation, and actually both they've talked about the different packs. The way Essence works is you can curate a set of practices that you want to use for your teams to select from. So the curation bit's fine, and add in custom practices. And again, an organization can bring in custom hexes that might be proprietary. They don't need to just be from the wider ecosystem. So if you want a daily company-wide meditation as a hexi, I don't see why that would be a problem, or as an Essence practice. Would you disagree? Or would you be happy for that to appear in the activities? Okay, so what else have we got? So I might ask, maybe Dave's gone near, you can explain a little bit about the acrylics. There's a few questions about what the acrylics are and how they're used. So Tim, paradoxically, more choices don't equal better outcomes. This should be a forcing function for measure and adapt, but will require significant facilitation.
And I think that's a model a lot of Agile coaches will take. They'll select the ones they want to limit the set and then force the integration. That's fine. We're not stopping that. We're encouraging it. Yeah. Others, and that's where we get into the company packs and lots of things like that. Right. So there are going to, in answer to Julian's, we are going to run the Hexi training course around Europe and around the world over the next 3 months. Nothing is going to be solidified till we've gone through that. Nia and I are working on second release, second design stage. So Nia's the person to ask about that. So nobody's going to rush this stuff because we need to get it right. We're building the other partners. So Essence, Ivar Jacobson is our first partner. There are other partners coming on this, and we'll interface them with Ivar Jacobson as well, because there may be synergies there. So I hate to use the phrase, we're currently working on a coalition of the willing, which has an unfortunate historical precedence, but you know what I'm saying, is starting to build that and build that momentum.
And we have talked about potentially joint training as well. If people are interested in both, a one-day introduction to both is probably quite an attractive.
What we have agreed to do is we will put 2 people on Essence training and they will put 2 people on our training, because when we worked with Nora Bates, and that was one of the ways we integrated warm data in with SenseMaker, and that's actually one of the most powerful things we've done around abductive techniques lately. So we will be doing some cross-training as well. And I have to go and see Tosca throw herself off the battlements, having been betrayed. But so
shall we do a kind of
I'll leave you, and Nia's the designer here, so she can answer all the questions which I would otherwise have answered badly. Sorry, Nia.
So I would like to probably just, before you drop off completely, thank you very much for participation this morning, this afternoon, this evening, wherever we are. And for those of you that want to continue a little bit, I'm sure Nia can stand in admirably for Dave. I saw there was a couple of questions about the acrylics. Is that worth you explaining a little bit, Nia?
Yeah, so I've dropped some images in the chat, and it's just to go through what our current acrylics look like. I don't know if everyone's got a chance to have a look at them.
Are you able to share them, or shall I find them and share them?
I have quite a lot on my screen at the moment.
Okay, let me find them and I'll try and share them. So do you want to explain how they're used first?
Yeah, so you can overlay them on top of the methods to show like what the intended use of the method could be. Is it a sense-making process? Is it a discovery? Is it an intervention? And then we have the clear acrylics, which these ones, which you can then overlay on the methods as you move to a different one. So are you linking them together? Are you moving back and forth? That's it there.
So is that the thing you showed there, Nia?
That's right, yeah.
Okay, so we've got the different types and they're able to provide extra knowledge about what's happening on that intersection of the hexagons. Is that right?
That's
or
right,
on top
exactly.
of one?
Exactly.
That makes sense.
So in the other image, then we have examples of what they actually look like.
Okay, so let's find that.
I think it's the definitions that are most important.
Mm-hmm.
Any questions?
Is that them there?
Yeah, that's them.
Right, okay, yeah. And it comes back to the point that Dave was making, that it's about making people think and getting conversations going. And Nick's point about when you're in person, these conversations flow more easily than when you're remote. And the same with the Essence games. We talk a lot about gameplay and providing opportunities for people to kind of talk and collaborate, and using physical things like tokens and cards to help do that.
Yes,
so
exactly.
look at the chat.
And I can see the chat there as well. If there's a place to download them, they work much better in workshops. We've tried to do this virtually, and at the moment, it's not.
Yeah. So to Nabil's point, can people use them digitally? You have tried, but as Nick was saying, have you taken part in, Nick, both in virtual and physical with the Hexies?
Yeah, I did. I mean, it worked. It was on Miro, if I can remember correctly. In fact, Donna, I think I saw Donna come up just now. So Donna did a lot of facilitation around that with Dave. Yeah, so it was possible, and I think there's improvements coming that side as well. But compared to what I've done virtually with Essence, it was a different experience. It's fitting. I mean, I spoke to Dave about this last week. It's probably the Essence stuff virtually is more mature than the Hexi stuff at the minute. But then the Hexi stuff's only just really been released, so you'd expect that.
So Simon, is it Reindl? You've had a few comments in the chat. I was wondering if you wanted to unmute and give us your thoughts, or ask any questions that you've, because there's been a few responses during the chat as well, I've noticed. What are your thoughts, Simon? Or if you'd rather not unmute, that's fine. Oh, here we go.
I think they're two complementary and interjoining metacognition frameworks to help an organization choose appropriate practices, like I said in my comment. I think helping organizations choose from the pick and mix of Agile without getting into the framework wars will enable teams to focus on delivery of value, as opposed to, you get this whole thing of, are you Kanban or Scrum? Are you in or are you out? Oh, this framework's bad. It's just a waste of time. So it's brilliant. And from a lean Agile procurement perspective, we can start branching out beyond software. I think we need to lift our heads up and think about total product delivery. What works across organizations? Are there people practices? Are there procurement practices? Onboarding practices? This can all go into these kits to just make it easier for people to focus on value delivery. So I'm really excited, and I want to learn more about both.
Excellent, good. Anyone else want to ask any questions or provide any comments and any thoughts that you have? Have we missed Nabil? Have I missed anything in the chat that you've spotted?
How are people going to find us if there is an interest? I've seen a lot of messages related to Hexi, but I don't think we have been as good in providing references. Maybe we should do that.
Yeah, so I did put a link in the chat to the Essence pages, including, and within that I'll drop it in again so it's at the bottom. On those pages, there's a thing called the Coaching Download Hub. If you search for free Agile coaching cards, it should pop up the search history. But that's where you can download the current sets of cards if you're interested. So I'll pop that in the chat in a second. Johan, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I'm not that experienced in either, but my understanding of the Hexi cards is it's kind of exploring and emerging what's the problem, what's the solution. And when I'm reading of Essence, there is this label area of concern, and that makes my thought going back to rational unified process with a system boundary or system in focus. So that's quite two different approaches, but maybe I misinterpret the Essence area of concern, or can you elaborate on that? What does that imply, area of concern?
Mm-hmm. Ivar, do you want to pick that one up? Or should I?
I'm happy when basically when you develop a software, any kind of endeavor project, there are, as we have seen it, three major areas of concern that we always have to consider. And an area of concern is a customer area, where we identify two alphas, two things to progress. Opportunity, there is always an opportunity, the reason you do something, and it goes through a number of states. From the beginning, you have maybe just an idea, and at some point at the end, you have a business case and a really motivation why you do it. You have a stakeholder is another important thing, and many projects are failed because we don't take into consideration the stakeholders and don't get them involved as much as we should. And they also, from the beginning, you have identified maybe which kind of stakeholders you need, and so on. They go through states, so they are alphas. Another area of concern is solution. In the solution area, you have the actually solution, the system, the software system or whatever, and you have the requirements. And they are, from the beginning, you have just conceived the requirements. They go through states. And in the third area of concern, you have the actually endeavor itself, and that includes the team. From the beginning, you have maybe money to a team, and then you funding for a team, and later you get identify the team members, but they don't play well together. They have never played together. So they are also alphas, and you have work to be done, and a number of work items that you have to progress, and you have a way of working, the actual method you want to use. And that is from the beginning, maybe not very much, and it grows, and eventually you have something that everyone has agreed on. So these are the key elements. Basically, another way to see it is that the software development or any kind of development goes through, has the progress through 7 dimensions. And these are the opportunities, stakeholder requirements, system, way of working, team, and work. And they progress in waves. You don't go too fast along one dimension, because then you have missed, you can have done completely mistake. So I don't see any relation to rational unified process at all, but that's interesting that you came up with it.
So Jason suggested in the chat, areas of focus might be a better description of it. It's not a scoping thing, but by the thumbs up, I'm gathering that made sense to you. Craig, you've mentioned being at a talk on complexity recently. Would you like to unmute and tell us a little bit about what made you think of that?
Sorry, Simon, can you just repeat that? I missed it.
Yeah, just noticing your comment. You say you were at a talk on complexity recently. This is also a more open-ended approach. I was wondering if you wanted to expand a bit on that comment.
Sorry, it's Craig. Where is Craig?
Yeah, Craig Coburn.
So,
sorry, Craig, not Greg. Yeah.
Just a quick intro, and it's taking Kanban, Scrum, blending it with Cynefin, try and work out kind of what sort of approaches and things to do next based on Cynefin state. So it's not like this prescriptive framework. It's more just saying, what's the context here? So what do we do next? And then you can choose and adapt the methods that suit that. So again, I see a lot of movement generally in Agile space towards this, thankfully, more thoughtful and context-driven decision-making. So I can see that. I mean, there's a lot of work here potentially for coaches, which is things that as my coach, but it's a good thing for Agile to actually be considering more of the actions before you just launch in.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And both approaches are about, deciding where to go in the next step. It might just be one step. It might not be for the next 6 months. And the waves Ivar just talked about, you've constantly got the chance to reassess your way of working and decide if you want to make a change.
I mean, all too often these frameworks come as that's the package, take it or leave it. I mean, for instance, SAFe does PI planning. I'm finding, for instance, that a 3-month rolling plan that's updated monthly is more useful for some teams. It's less big bang, it's less incremental change. It suits them, right? But it's about having the willingness to try something rather than saying, well, that's not part of SAFe, you shouldn't be doing that. No, look, do what's right for your situation.
Good. Okay, drawing towards the end, it's probably worth thinking a little bit about how we can continue this conversation, about how we can maybe get some people together to take it further a bit and to look at more of the integration, to maybe get some case studies where we could start, applying it if we've got people that are interested in taking an approach or a practice or a method in whichever context you choose and turning it into hexes or learning about how the Essence language can help you do that. What's the best way we think to do that? Is it just in the chat, or we can certainly share some details in the meetup group if you want to reflect on it and get back to us. But it's certainly something that from a community perspective, it's going to be done better with more minds than fewer. So there's a few people saying they're interested in the chat, which is great. I'll try and make sure. We're going to get you're going to save the chat before we close the Zoom, Nabil. Yep. So we'll be able to catch that from the chat, but also we'll put something in the meetup. I guess it's a chat as well, isn't it? With an opportunity for you to get involved. And for those of you who are watching this in the recording, you'll be able to get involved as well. So that's great. Quite a few people interested. And yeah, any last thoughts from anybody? If you want to raise your hand, or before I ask Ivar for his sort of closing thoughts, and then to Nabil. It's great to see such interest. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I just posted a number of things that could be interesting to read, to get a little deeper into Essence. I mean, one observation that I think is over the years, we have been working on Essence since 2004. And over the years, many people have told us that if it takes too long, it will be outdated once you are done or come up with it. The interesting thing, Dave has worked 20 years and he still doesn't think he has got everything, of course, get enough to have a complete picture of everything. And we don't think so either. And still, we see that the community around us is growing rapidly. We are now working with about more than 10, I think it was 13 people on essentializations. Famous, well-known people, many of them, and others have very good ideas. And when it comes to client side, a year ago we had one maybe client interested. Today we are talking about 24 of clients and have a couple of really serious engagement. So I think I see this partnership as a maturity sign. First, on that we actually can get to a partnership where we can see values, because many people have difficult to see values in what is outside their own domain. I think it's clear that I see enormous value in this partnership. We cover different kinds of problems, but very related. And it will take time to develop it, clearly. And but I think the result will be very rewarding to everybody. So at least on my side, we are very happy having got to this agreement. We see, of course, that it's great that the more successful our partner is, the more have we found the right partner. The more partners our partner finds, the more have we found the right partner. And in fact, the similar, we have many partnerships in a similar way, but all of it work together.
So, thank you.
Very optimistic for the future.
And I just would point out in the chat, it's nice to see Jason saying the Agile Business Consortium is working and talking to both of us, and there's a couple of other examples of people where they're interested in both ways of describing their practices, and I think that's going to be increasingly the way. I guess before we finish, is it worth just asking Donna or perhaps Nia if you have any final words to echo what Ivar said, or has it all been said?
All good on my front. I'm not sure about Donna.
Yeah, I think it's all been said from the point of view of Dave sharing our intended next steps. As you've heard, it is all evolving very much on our side, but we're looking forward to the cross-training and to, as a couple of people have commented, a more practical workshop or intervention, but we're not looking to rush that process. So there are a couple of folks on the call who are already working with us to try and help us make sense of this all. We're interested in continuing the conversations within our shared communities of practice as well. And thank you all for your comments and your time tonight. It's been really useful to understand what the community would like to see in terms of practical next steps.
Well, thank you. Nabil, over to you.
Well, this is the end. So I guess I'll just end by saying thank you all for your attention tonight. I hope you've learned lots. I'm really looking forward to the next steps on this, as it sounds like this is just the beginning of a journey. Definitely indicate any interest as well, or just any comments you might have on the meetup page in the comments section. I'm sure Simon and myself and the others can monitor that and check that to see what any follow-up remarks you might have, or how we might get in contact with you, for example. So thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Ivar, and the departed Dave, who is 2 minutes into enjoying his opera. Thank you so much, Simon, for also facilitating most of the conversation, and Nia and Donna as well. And of course, thank you to everyone for listening in. And have a Merry Christmas, because this will be our last event of the year. So definitely enjoy the holidays and enjoy Christmas and enjoy the new year. And we look forward to seeing you all in 2023.
Thank you.
Cheers, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Bye-bye.